Hey guys, and welcome back to a new video. In this video, I will show you how you can implement biometric authentication on Android. So pretty much just how you can display a little sheet to your users so they can authenticate themselves. And that could happen either via their fingerprint, that could happen via Face ID, that could happen via their security pattern, or just their PIN code. So I'm pretty sure you will know this mechanism maybe from your own banking app or so, where you can log in alternatively to using your banking password with some kind of biometric authentication, like showing your face. And what we'll build here is this little app with an authenticate button. If we click that, then actually the Android Studio screen share thing here doesn't show you that, but maybe you can see this on my device when I show you this like here. It is actually showing fingerprint prompt. If I cancel this, then you can see we actually get the information that the authentication was canceled. If I use my wrong finger, then you can see it tells us authentication failed. It actually just printed authentication failed, but then I canceled it. But also if I use my correct finger here, then you can see I get authentication success, and I could do whatever I want with that in the app. For example, lead the user to their bank account. And all you need to get started with that is this Android X biometric library. Just add this to your build.gradle app file and then dive into a new class actually. New class, I'd like to call this Biometric Prompt Manager. That's the class that will allow us to show this biometric prompt, to configure it, and then also to observe its results. So I have a function show biometric prompt, which takes a title and a description like this, doesn't have any return type, and then we can get started with defining our prompt inside here. First of all, we need a reference to our biometric manager, which is equal to biometric manager. Make sure to use this one that comes from Android X, from the library we included that from, and here we need to pass the context. To get that, let's pass that in our constructor. And this actually needs to be an activity here, because we need this activity specifically later in this function. And we're not just fine with an activity like this, because how this biometric manager actually works under the hood is it will show its own fragment. So this little sheet that pops up is a fragment that contains this security information, security UI. And we can only show fragments in activities that are actually so-called app compat activities. But by default in Compose projects, we have component activities. A component activity is not an app compat activity. So we need to make this an app compat activity, which we don't have here as an import, but we can easily add this by including the app compat import. So simply implementation, type in app compat, and the auto completion will do the rest. Just this library here. Click sync now. Go to main activity. You need to import this, and then we're good. Inside here, we then pass an app compat activity, app compat activity. Not sure why it doesn't recognize that. Alt enter to import that. And here we can then, pass our activity reference. Next up, we want to define our so-called authenticators, because there are multiple ways how we can authenticate a user with this biometric prompt. And with that, we can either say that we want to have a strong biometric prompt, so biometric underscore strong. I'll enter to import that here again from the Android X library. And that's pretty much just an integer. And we can combine these integers to say we want to have multiple authenticators with the OR operator. So it's really just like having flags, or the device credential, for example. So device credential would strictly not actually be a biometric authentication, since biometric is something that is about you as a person and not something you know, like a device pattern. But by including this, we would also give the user the option to choose their device pattern over the fingerprint. However, this combination of having strong biometric prompts, which would be a fingerprint or a Face ID, and device credential, this combination is only available from Android API level 30. So let's check that. If build version.sdkint is at least 30, we want to pass these authenticators, and else we just say biometric strong. All right, next up, I want to define our so-called prompt info, which is equal to prompt info.builder. And here we can construct how our prompt looks like with a typical builder pattern. We can say set title and set that to our title. We can say set description set that to a description. Oops. We can set the allowed authenticators to our authenticators. We could set the confirmation required to something like true or false. So what this will do is if it is true, it will give the biometric manager a hint that the user still needs to kind of confirm that they want to authenticate. So if this is false and you initiate this authentication, it might immediately start to recognize your face with Face ID. But if you set this to true, which I think is the default, the user still needs to click something like, hey, now let me scan my face. But again, it's just a hint. So even if this is false, that doesn't strictly mean that Android will do it that way. It's rather just saying to the operating system, hey, it would be nice if you could make that work. I'll remove that again. Let's see what else we do have here. We have a subtitle or a negative button text. This negative button text is actually only really required or possible below Android 30. And there it's actually needed, but above it's not needed, at least not for this combination. So what we want to do is, again, have a check. We're here on Android. We want to have version checks. SDK int, if that is less than 30 in this case. We want to also have our prompt info and set the negative button text to something like cancel. If we're above that, we just don't set a negative button text here. Okay, now that we have created our prompt info, now that we have a reference to our biometric manager, we can think about how we make our UI observe the results, because there could be potentially a lot of different results. It's not just about authentication was successful or not. It could also be that authentication is currently not available, so that the hardware is maybe busy, maybe that another app currently displays this prompt. It could be that the device doesn't even support this feature of biometric authentication. And for all these kinds of errors we care about, I would like to create a little enum class here. We can then send to the UI. So let's call it biometric result, and actually still interface, because for one of these types, we care about an error message we would need to pass along with it. But this could be a data object, hardware unavailable. So biometric authentication is generally available on the device, but right now the hardware for that is busy and you can't use it. Data object feature unavailable, which would mean, okay, we can't even use biometric auth on this device, maybe because it doesn't have a Face ID mechanism, doesn't have a fingerprint sensor or so. Then we have a data class authentication failed. Authentication error, which gives us an error string. So this doesn't mean that authentication failed if we use our wrong finger, but that rather means that it failed because of something else, so not because of the user's fault. We then want to have a data object when it really failed. So that will be passed when the user just uses a finger that they didn't set up biometric auth with. We obviously want to have an authentication success. So when they use their correct finger and it's correctly recognized. And last but not least, we'll have an authentication not set. So if the user just doesn't have any set up authentication mechanism, because what we want to do in that case is we want to send them to their settings and let them create a pattern in order to use this feature here that we're building. And how I now want to send these results to our UI is via a channel, because we can't just return the biometric result here, since potentially multiple results could be emitted here over a period of time. So a single return value doesn't suffice here. So instead, I would like to use a channel which lets us send such events, such results into it and then observe them in our UI. So something like a private val result channel is equal to a channel of our biometric result. We can then have a public variable of that, which is our prompt results, or whatever you want to call that, result channel receive as flow. So we just expose that as a normal Kotlin flow. We can then listen to and observe in our UI, and then we can proceed right here. First of all, we want to check if biometric auth is actually available on the device. So when our manager .can authenticate with our authenticators, if that is biometric manager, is that the correct manager? Yes. Biometric error hardware unavailable, then we want to send that in our channel. So result channel, try send, and we send this hardware unavailable event or result in our channel. If our result here is biometric error no hardware, then that means our feature is unavailable. So there's no hardware that would support this authentication. So then we say biometric results, feature unavailable. And if it's biometric manager none enrolled, we say result channel try send. In this case, it would be authentication not set. So that means the user would need to set up authentication in order to use this feature. And there's also one for when a security update is available. I will leave that out here. So else we can say we don't care about the rest. But in either of these cases, we actually wouldn't like to proceed. So we could just return out of this function actually, since the user would need to try this again and call this show biometric prompt function again. But if we didn't return in any of these cases, we can proceed here by defining the actual prompt. And that's equal to a biometric prompt, again, from the Android X library, where we need to pass our activity and as a second parameter, the authentication callback. So we have a biometric prompt authentication callback. And in here, we can hit Command O and override these three functions on authentication error. So if something failed with the biometric auth mechanism itself, here we're going to say result channel, try send, biometric result dot fail, error. And we pass the error string we get here, convert that to a string. We can copy paste this here, and here. In this case, we want to make this authentication a success. And last but not least, here we say failed. And then after defining this prompt, we also have to use it. So we say prompt.authenticate, which will actually perform this authentication. And here we pass our prompt info. You can optionally also pass such a crypto object to further provide security here, to decrypt and encrypt that information. But I will leave that out here. In the official Android docs, they have a quite extensive section on how to do that. But for the sake of simplicity, let's just have the normal prompt here by passing prompt info.build. Alrighty, let's dive into main activity and use this. First of all, let's have a private val. Let's call it prompt manager. Make it by lazy, so we initialize it as soon as we access it the first time. And here we say, we have a biometric prompt manager, our own custom class, passing in our activity, and then we can use it down here. Instead of this greeting, let's create a simple column, and we say modifier fill max size, so just fill the whole side of our screen. We say we have a vertical arrangement of center, and a horizontal alignment of center as well. Then inside here, we first of all want to have a button, and when we click that, we want to show our authentication dialog. The text could be authenticate, and when we click this button, we just want to use our own prompt manager and show the biometric prompt. We pass in a title like sample prompt. We pass in a description of, let's say, sample prompt description, and then we can already initiate that prompt. What we can't do yet is observe the results. So let's change that by going in here and say val biometric result by prompt manager dot prompt results, which is our flow, which you can now collect as state. Normally you would use collect as state lifecycle here. Requires a different dependency. Let's just leave this here. This won't lead to any problems in this case. But since that doesn't come from a state flow, we need to provide an initial value here for the state, which in this case is null. Let's import this. Also maybe put this in a separate line so you can see that better. And now this is just a nullable biometric result. If it's null, there's no result. And otherwise this compose state will just cache the latest biometric result that was sent into our channel. And now that we observe this result, we can also go here below our button and say if biometric result is not null, let's actually use a let check here. Biometric result, that let, and we get the result here, then we can check what that result actually is. When result, and actually then parse that to a simple text. Take this when block, put it here, go inside of this when block, alt enter to add the remaining branches, and here long, let's actually go here and alt enter to import these members to have that a little bit more readable. If it's an authentication error, we could say authentication error. Here we can actually also show the error message. So here we would take the result error, or let's just only show this result error in this case, resulted error. When it failed, we say authentication failed. When it's not set, authentication not set. When it was successful, authentication success. And almost done, feature unavailable. And last but not least, hardware unavailable. So that will serve us to show our text. The last thing we need to do is, if this authentication not set error result is actually returned, then we need to let the user choose their own pattern directly inside of our app. So that's at least what we would like to offer to the user, that they can do that. In order to do that, we need to go in here and observe these results in a launched effect block, biometric result, and check if this biometric result is authentication not set. And if that happens, and also our build, that version, that SDK int, is larger than build version codes that are, which I think is 30. So we can also, again, use 30 to keep it consistent, because only then this feature is available that the user can set this authentication right in the app. If that's the case, we need to define something called an enroll intent, which is just an intent with the action settings.action biometric enroll. We can call apply to configure that intent. And here we want to say put extra settings dot extra biometric authenticators allowed, since here we need to pass the authenticators that the user is actually allowed to pass here. So pretty much just what we passed here, since if we wouldn't allow the user to authenticate via a device credential, the settings dialog would actually also need to know that, since then the user shouldn't be able to also create such a device credential like a pattern. So here we can say biometric manager from Android X, authenticators.biometric strong, alt enter to import that, or what is that device credential. And then that we now have this intent, we also need to fire it and launch an activity with that. So we define an enroll launcher or so. Remember activity result, define an activity result contract, start activity for the result. So that's what I want to do with this contract. We take this launcher. If we launch it, we start an activity for result. The activity for result is just the activity where the user can choose a pattern. And then the result is, well, whether they chose a pattern or not. So here we would get the result. If we would want to care about what that is and distinguish between error and success, so we could just print this activity result is, it. And here we could then say enroll launcher.launch, and we pass in our enroll intent and launch that. So if we launch this, because I think this should be everything, take a look here on my device, then hide that. Then we actually get a crash. Interesting. Let's take a look and look at what that could be. Illegal state exception. Okay, yes, I know why. That's something I forgot. If we use an app compat activity, we also need to use an app compat theme, which we can very easily fix by going to RAS values themes. And here you can see we're not using an app compat theme. Instead, we need to remove this and say app compat theme, no action bar. Relaunch this. And wait a little moment. There we go. Here's our app. If I click authenticate, you will again not see this, but I am seeing this sample prompt. Not sure if you can see this as well. Hopefully the camera will focus this. And if I, let's say, fail this authentication, then I can see authentication failed. That works. You again can't see this, but let's say it succeeds. Then you can see authentication success. If I cancel this authentication, we should see authentication canceled. That is working perfectly fine. And when you're doing this, you will also notice, at least if you're using a little bit more modern device, at least of API level 30, that you can also use your pattern if you have defined one, or your PIN code, or whatever you chose as your personal security mechanism for your Android device. And just to show you, I've also opened an emulator here where I don't think I have set the pattern recognition. So we authenticate, and here you can actually see our sample prompt, and it seems like I do have this authentication here enabled. So let's see if we can also disable that. Okay, so I just went into our Android settings and disabled our screen lock, so we can hopefully see the full prompt here. You can see authentication canceled. If we click authenticate again, you can see authentication not set, and now Android actually lets us choose our own authentication mechanism. If we say we want a pattern, and we choose some kind of simple pattern here, we click next, we need to repeat it, confirm this, and then just set this up here. But this is pretty much just the activity we launched for result here. Here we can just say no thanks for now, and no thanks. And then we can try this again with our pattern now. So draw our pattern, and we get authentication success. Awesome. That's how you set up biometric authentication on Android. And if you're as big of a fan of Jetpack Compose as I am, then I have a gift for you. And that is a PDF that outlines the 20 most deadly mistakes you can make with Jetpack Compose. I go really deep inside of every single mistake, provide code snippets in that PDF, provide what's bad about that mistake and what it could lead to, and of course also how you should do it better. This PDF is completely free for you, and you can just download it by clicking the first link in this video's description. And other than that, thanks so much for watching this video. I will see you back in the next one. Have an amazing rest of your week. Bye bye.